I'm standing here in front of the famous Sadler's Wells Theatre in London. The theatre has been in this location for more than 3 centuries. However, the building as you see it here opened its doors about 10 years ago. The first few years were not a success. Financially, the theatre was in a lot of trouble, but also artistically, the theatre didn't deliver what it was supposed to do. Then, about 4 years ago, a new chief executive took over, called Alistair Spalding. And since then, especially the last few years, the theatre has really been a success. Financially, it's very sound, but also artistically, it's nowadays widely recognized again as one of the leading theatres of its kind in the world. Let's go inside and find out what Alistair and his team did to turn this thing around. Having taken over a theatre in crisis, Alistair Spalding needed to formulate a clear artistic vision for Sadler's Wells. This was based around the theatre playing a leading role in innovation in dance.
I wanted the focus to be on dance. I wanted to make sure that people understood what we were about, that we weren't just a theatre that did general things in Islington, that we were the dance house of London. And that can really span right over all of the different kind of forms within that, so from contemporary through to tango through to hip hop. The second thing was to create a situation where creativity went back into the heart of the organisation. There was a sense in which it had become really a receiving house where companies would come in, present their work one after the other, and it was a little bit difficult to get Sadler's Wells' identity outside of that. And the third thing, which is almost the most important in retrospect, was to try and get more control over the programme.
We were ambitious right from the start, and what drove our ambitions, both of us, is that we wanted to see the very best, and we had a belief that if you follow your instincts about putting on what's, the very best artistically, the audience will come.
In order to realise his artistic ambitions for Sadler's Wells, Alistair had to ensure a measure of financial stability. His approach was to programme a balance of different kinds of shows.
The economics of Sadler's Wells is a pretty difficult situation. We get a very low subsidy of around 14% of our turnover. So the rest we have to generate ourselves. So the first job of anyone in this seat is to make sure that the economy works, and therefore there has to be a number of shows which we know are going to perform in a certain way that are going to attract a significant number of audiences who will make the whole proposition pay. So there's a certain amount of the programme which is there for that reason. Particularly Christmas shows, and our association with Matthew Bourne is particularly important in that, because we run a show for 6 or 7 weeks at Christmas. There's a profit that comes back to the theatre. On other occasions, we're doing the opposite. We put a show on and it loses money. We know it will lose money because we're doing it for other reasons. We're doing it because we think it's important artistically and important for the where we're taking our audiences. Oddly enough, the shows which on the surface seem the most risky haven't necessarily cost us money. They've actually produced a profit because they've been very successful, and they've had very, very large attendances here at Sadler's Wells, and then they've gone on to tour around the world. So the little investment that we put at the beginning has been returned financially as well. So that's very clear. The Christmas and summer periods are very clear. In between, it's just a kind of mix of the two.
How does Alistair decide how many weeks to devote to well-established shows and how many to more experimental productions?
When I sit down at the beginning of the year, I never think, oh, we have to have this number of weeks which are going to produce a profit, or there's a general kind of intuition about it, if you like. There's an intuition particularly in terms of the amount of shows that you know you can put in the programme that are really going to lose money. Of course, we've also got the Peacock Theatre, which in one sense is a very clear proposition within the bigger framework, because that is only there to make money.
Alistair tirelessly communicated his new strategy for the theatre to employees, while gradually building the organisation to make the vision happen.
One of the priorities for me over the last 3 years has been to build a team of very good people. I've been looking for people who can bring their artistic and entrepreneurial skills to Sadler's Wells.
I think if you're working in an organisation that really cares about the arts, then you're going to be excited by the new things. And they don't always work. You know, you get excited about something. We had a great big show last year and we were all terribly excited and we sat there and, didn't really work. But that's okay too.
It's a volatile area, the arts. I mean, 20 years ago, this theatre was bankrupt. Now, I wasn't here when Alistair first came, and I think he's changed it on several key levels. One is that he's someone that is able to mix commercial programming with what I would call arts programming, possibly work that may not be so commercial but is important for the art form. So he is prepared to take financial risks.
We've got a turnover of about £15 million now, and we've got a budget next year of £500,000 in terms of commissioning new work. So it's still a fairly small percentage of our overall economy that we're putting into new things. I suppose the thing is that we take risks, but we take calculated risks.
In order to help Alistair's calculations, the theatre obsessively monitors numbers.
We'll look at particularly how the sales are going through the run. So, for example, you'll find that some shows are very much weekend shows, some shows are more weekday shows, and really being aware of that. We look at the drift, which is the difference between cash sales and seats sold, which is often an indicator of how many discounts, concessions are being taken up, things like our multi-buy, which is a very big factor, how we're doing in terms of attracting school groups, college groups, if those are the markets we're aiming for. So keeping a view of that overall, and also where the house is filling as well, looking at whether people are booking mainly in the stalls, mainly in the circle, looking at issues like price resistance, in which case you might have to think about repricing the house slightly, and adding all that information up from experience we get to know from other shows where we have to make differences in the future.
Alistair Spalding's vision for Sadler's Wells was to make it the physical centre of innovation in dance and a place where artists could meet informally.
Everywhere I've worked in buildings in the arts, I've always thought it was important that it wasn't just administrators around, that there were actual living artists who were in the building in one way or another. Because what it does is it reminds everyone of what we're doing. It's not just that the shows are on in the evening. The whole organisation throughout the day is involved in the work of artists, and I think that's very important in any creative place like Sadler's Wells.
Alistair set up long-term collaborations with what he called associate artists.
The associate artists are people who I think are great choreographers or companies, and what we do is there's no formal contract with them. It's a sort of memorandum of understanding. It's an arrangement where we support the work either by giving them physical office space or providing rehearsal space, and also financially investing in their productions. And then they in turn give us some allegiance and loyalty, and when they're doing a large-scale piece of dance, they do it at Sadler's Wells.
Alistair also set up a research programme supported by the Jerwood Foundation and hired producer Emma Gladstone to run it.
Our research programme has three parts to it. The core of it is the idea of developing cross-art form collaborations to go on to be projects that can be on the main stage here. So it's looking at either inviting people together that we introduce, or people that come to us with an idea at the very early stage of development.
So what we wanted to do was to give opportunities for people to work on ideas before they got to the stage of rehearsal. And sometimes to be able to say, well, fine, that's not going to work, or it's not worth pursuing. Let's go and do something else.
It's a great opportunity for the artists because they don't have the pressure of a show. I mean, they're actually playing and seeing if something's going to work. There's another strand to it, which is a course that I run at Christmas time called the Big Intensive. The last 2 times we've done it, it's been specifically about what it means to make work in a big house and for a big house. So that's to do with the technical team, the size of the space, sound and lights and sets. Some of it's just to do with making good work. So So about structure, narrative, the dramaturgy of a piece, the kind of arc of a piece.
The other side is to try and bring together people from different disciplines, and it's a sort of rule of the Jerwood program studio that you need to bring in someone from, say, visual arts or music or something outside of dance, and to try and encourage collaborations in that way.
To this end, Emma introduced what she called dinner dance.
3 times a year it's a meal. I'm just inviting 4 choreographers and 8 other people, so filmmakers or lighting designers or writers, composers, occasionally some other producers, but it's really to let them meet people they might not know in the same way as I do with the cross-art form collaboration. So it's just to introduce them to mix worlds. I mean, I see about 200 shows a year, I suppose, something like that. If I see a lighting designer I think is really fascinating, or if there's some text in a piece that I think is written in a way that would be sympathetic to dance, or if there's someone using objects and puppetry that I think might be useful, then I can ask them to come to this meal. And it's simply a nice night out without any further obligation, but it allows us to meet them in an informal way. We circulate emails the next day, and it just begins a kind of exchange. It's really crucial just to be what's current, and I suppose that's what interests us, is art that's made of today, you know, that is about today and about the world that we live in now.
In the 4 years since Alistair took over, audience figures have risen dramatically, from 360,000 in 2004 to over 470,000 in 2008. As a consequence, the theatre produces a steady and stable profit. Most importantly to Alistair and his team, the theatre has regained its global reputation for cutting-edge innovation in the art of dance. So how does he explain his success?
Sometimes people introduce me at conferences and say, oh, this is the person who's turned around Sadler's Wells, and I say, well, the thing is, I have done it, but I couldn't have given advice 4 years ago, because what I've learned in retrospect. In a way, I've looked back at what I've done and said, these are the reasons why that happened. It's a very strange set of processes there. I didn't set out with this strategy kind of consciously. It was a set of intuitive decisions that happened at that time. When I look back, I see why I did that, because we have more control. Bringing artists in, that's made us special on the map in London. But those things were done in an intuitive way, and I feel in a way that is a creative process in the same way as an artist would be. I mean, things come to me on the bus, or in the most extraordinary places, and I think, aha, this is where we should be thinking about that. But I couldn't say that I would work through that in a business plan or anything. They just happen whenever they do happen.